This is breaking news.
Thank you for joining us tonight at 10. I'm Cameron Kelly. We're breaking out of a special report to bring you local reaction to the shooting at Trump's rally. The special report will continue again at 10:30. Just hours ago, there was a shooting at a rally for former President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. Law enforcement say they are investigating it as an attempted assassination. We have been told that Trump is doing okay after the shooting. A local prosecutor said the suspected gunman and at least one attendee are dead and 2 spectators were critically injured. The former president released a statement on Truth Social hours after the shooting. It reads in part, quote, "I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of my right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong and that I heard a whistling sound. Shots and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realized then what was happening. God bless America." 2 officials told the AP that the shooter was not an attendee at the rally and was killed by U.S. Secret Service agents. Trump was talking about border crossing numbers during the rally when the shots started. That's when Trump put his hand up to his right ear. 2 more pops could be quickly heard, and that's when agents tackled Trump to protect him. And President Joe Biden spoke earlier today on the shooting. He says he condemns the shooting that happened at the rally, and he says everybody should condemn it.
The bottom line is, the Trump rally was a rally that he should have been able to be conducted peacefully without any problem. But the idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It's just not appropriate. Everybody must condemn it.
White House says President Biden spoke with former President Trump this evening about the shooting. Vice President Kamala Harris also released a statement and says, quote, "Doug and I are relieved that he was not seriously injured. We are praying for him and his family and all those who have been injured and impacted by this senseless shooting." Now let's bring in WMTV's Shannon Ajawan, and Shayna, statements from Wisconsin politicians are pouring in. Tell us about that.
That's right, and they are from both sides of the aisle. Most are condemning the violence and offering prayers for the former president.
Gunshots rang through a crowd in Butler, Pennsylvania this afternoon. Former President Donald Trump was making remarks at a rally when the popping sounds were heard. No matter their political affiliation, from governors to senators to religious leaders, many are speaking out. "My thoughts are with President Trump and all of the folks attending tonight's rally in Pennsylvania," Governor Tony Evers said on X. He went on to thank first responders for putting their safety at risk in order to respond to the, quote, "horrific act of violence." Senator Tammy Baldwin also strongly condemned the act, stating, quote, "My thoughts are with President Trump and his family." Others, such as Senator Ron Johnson and former Governor Scott Walker, posted pictures of Trump, both adding they are praying for him. Senate candidate Eric Hovde also took to X, stating, quote, "Please pray for President Trump and for our country." Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson wished him a speedy recovery. The former president expected to be in the city in less than a week for the Republican National Convention.
The Trump campaign reiterated that the former president is doing well, and he is expected to proceed with the convention in Milwaukee next week. They add he is looking forward to it. Live in the studio, Shannon Ajawan, WMTV 15 News.
Thank you, Shayna.
Our veterans are on the street. They're dying
before the RNC is set to kick off in Milwaukee on Monday. The former president's campaign says this shooting will not keep him from missing the RNC, as Shayna said. Part of the statement reads, "President Trump will continue to share his vision to make America great again, but we will make sure to keep you updated if there are any changes." And speaking of the RNC, chairman of the Milwaukee 2024 Host Committee released the following statement. "President Trump is in my prayers after surviving this assassination attempt. We are also heartbroken that reports indicate that at least one innocent person has been killed and perhaps others have been injured. This horrific violence has no place in America." Guests have already begun to arrive in Wisconsin, and we look forward to working with the Republican National Committee to welcome everyone to Milwaukee this week. And support from all over the nation are pouring in for former President Trump, and that includes Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson. The mayor's statement reads, "There is no space, absolutely none, for this sort of violence in America. No one should be shot, not like this. Not kids, not churchgoers, and not a candidate for president of the United States. I wish Mr. Trump a speedy recovery." Some Republicans say this shooting was a result of the left fueling fear if Trump wins the election. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise released this following statement. For weeks, Democrat leaders have been fueling ludicrous hysteria that Donald Trump winning re-election would be the end of democracy in America. Clearly, we've seen far left lunatics act on violent rhetoric in the past. This incendiary rhetoric must stop. And make sure you download the free WMTV 15 News app as we continue to follow this developing story. New information will keep coming in the weekend and the week progresses, so stick with us for the most up-to-date information.